best way that we can. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Please let me know if you cannot see this. Looks good. Okay, thank you. So the purpose today is to give you enough information so that you can go off and hopefully submit a compliant and winnable SBIR with the DoD. The SBIR program, if you're not familiar with it, it's been around since the mid-'80s. It is a fantastic way to get non-dilutive capital into your company to further any technological innovation, R&D sort of work that you are looking to do. The challenge with the DoD is that they have very, very specific needs and very, very specific topics. And the challenge for you as a company is to align your business strategy and what you developed your company to do and the type of things you want to produce, and align those with what the government, with the DoD specifically, is asking for. So that can sometimes be a challenge, and we'll kind of talk about how we get around that and things to think about. The DoD solicitation is currently open, and as Jamie mentioned, the SBDC here in Colorado has applications open for our Red Team Review program. And the reason we are doing it so early is because these proposals, in order to get a good proposal in, typically take at least a month to work through. One of our subject matter experts here within the SBDC, when he does his presentations kind of about SBIR 101, his estimate for how much time it's going to take you to build a proposal can be up to 60 hours. And so I know you have a lot of other things to do in a week. And so you need at least 10 hours a week to work on this. We'll dive into our agenda. We're going to talk a little bit about what the BAA, Broad Agency Announcement, that's the term for the solicitation that the DoD uses. Kind of talk about what it is, the parts of it, where to find it, how the topics work. Then we'll talk about the process of identifying the topic and building your proposal, what the DoD uses as an evaluation criteria, and some strategies that you can use in building the proposal and putting together the highest probability of a win for yourself. And then finally, we'll talk a little bit about technical and business assistance that the different components offer. One thing I should note, if you aren't already aware, the SBIR program is used, or the 13 agencies offer SBIR contracts and grants. The DoD is the largest spender. They spend the most money in this area because they have the highest R&D budget. They do 3 rounds of solicitations a year. Not all components participate in the solicitations each time. The one that is open right now is round 2. The link to the solicitation is here. It goes through a portal that we call DSIP. And it looks very familiar, if not exactly like NASA's submission site, EHB, if you've ever done a NASA SBIR. Don't be fooled, though. There's differences between them. Each agency is very different in terms of what they ask for, the content, and how the submission occurs. So just because if you've done one before, it may not be the same if you've never done DoD. And each agency is a little bit different, too. But in each agency also kind of has a different strength or objective, or kind of like what they're looking for in proposals as a general goal. And the DoD's reflects almost word for word the overall goal written by the SBA for the SBIR program. And that's regarding the purpose of stimulating technological innovation and strengthening the role of small businesses to meet the research needs of the DoD, and fostering participation by minority and disadvantaged persons in the space of technological innovation. And then obviously the biggest goal across all of SBIR is moving these technological innovations into the commercial marketplace, which is what we call commercialization, and getting these good ideas out to the market, even if the market is just still the DoD. So as I mentioned, each component has their own sort of mini BAA. So you have 2 announcements. And if you pull the announcement out of DSIP, here's DSIP, a screenshot of it from 2 days ago. We're at 40 days right now. If you can see the countdown clock there, you'll see it's a PDF that gets downloaded, and we have the schedule over here highlighted on the left, what we call the BAA schedule. I'll show you that next. And then we have a separate topics list. And so this is a web-based version of all of the topics that the DoD has out there. When we talk about a topic, the topic is the agency's specific technological need. They'll be very specific and say, I would like a camera that can fly on an F-16 that can see to a resolution of 2 feet of the Earth's surface, or something to that nature, and very specific. So those are what we call topics. So all of these topics are listed by agency within this CITES module of DSIP. And that's a great place to kind of just scroll through, look at the topic titles, and then click on it and open it up and see exactly what the government's looking for. As far as the BAA schedule goes, I believe I might have a screenshot of it. If not, I will pull up the web version. I have it actually live on my computer right now. The BAA schedule has the schedule for both the SBIR and the STTR and the Air Force CSO. As you can see here on the bottom right, Air Force CSO is different. Air Force is not participating in this round of normal traditional SBIRs. They have a version of CSO that actually, since this is an old screenshot, it actually closed today. So if you're interested in Air Force and the CSO, which stands for Commercial Solutions Offering, that will be open again in the fall. There's a fall version of this. And if you've got, a very commercial product that's already very far along technologically, and you're kind of just looking for an Air Force customer to move it into, the CSO might be a place for you. But we're not going to talk about Air Force today. We'll just talk about the components that are actually participating in this round. And I also mentioned that there's an STTR BAA. For the DoD, they are not combined. There's an SBIR and there's an STTR. So if you're interested in STTR, which is, if you're not familiar, that's the flavor of SBIR where you must have a research institution partnered with you in order to go after those topics. You can definitely look at STTR topics and the STTR solicitation and see if there's anything interesting in there. Pretty much everything we talk about today will be common between SBIR and STTR solicitations for DoD. There are some minor nuances regarding the teaming arrangement and budget, and there's a lot fewer STTR topics. But if you have a good relationship with, say, a university or a federally funded research and development center, there might be a good opportunity for you in the STTR solicitation. But most of the information that you'll see here is specific to SBIR. So the DoD is beginning to. I've been doing this a long time. I've been doing these for almost 2 decades now, and there's been definitely a change as our society has changed, and they are publicizing what their critical areas of interest are now. Before, they didn't publicize it, and we used to think of it as more like bombs and bullets. Things that kind of supported warfighters in a very hardware tactical sense. But now, as you can see here, the critical technology areas that they're most interested in. So when you look at this topic list, you'll get a flavor for this, are all of these items. So everything from biotech to directed energy, quantum science, advanced materials, renewable energies on here, which is very interesting. For a DoD situation, the DoD is leaning into pulling humans out of the danger zones in protecting the United States and our interests. and looking more towards AI, robots, things that people can man from behind a computer more. So there's a lot of interesting things, though, too, with advanced materials, if you can think about clothing and that, too, as well. So as we're talking about DoD, you can kind of start turning your brain a little bit to kind of understand what they're looking for nowadays. There are some additional technology areas. They're component specific. So you may not see these in all of the flavors that we just talked about aren't across the board for each component. So like Army would probably be more interested in combat casualty care. So that's more of a medical spin. Army's really the ones that we think about with combat casualties. We also have nuclear information, so that a lot of the Navy will use nuclear technology for their submarines, for example. Sustainment and logistics is really interesting, and because of the participating components this time around, you'll see why that's on there too. As a note, as I mentioned before, this is coming up to be due. It's due June 14th. That's 12 p.m. Eastern, 10 a.m. Colorado time. I just had a client last night who didn't realize that with the Air Force CSO that was due today. So pay very particular attention to the time zone. Here are the participating components for this round. Again, as I mentioned, Air Force is not participating in a traditional sense. They only had the CSO open on its own schedule, obviously, because it was due today. So we have Army, Navy, DHA, DLA. So that's kind of where that sustainment and logistics technology area came from that you just saw. DTRA, and then OSD, specifically quantum science, and then US SOCOM. So those are the only components that are out there right now. You might see the same components again, round 3 later this year. Some of them participate every time and some of them do not. This is a phase 1 proposal that we're talking about here. You may have heard of a direct to phase 2. Typically across all SBIRs, you must have a phase 1 before you can propose a phase 2. In this particular case, there are 3 components who have direct to phase 2 topics. So these are topics that program managers at the DoD have said, like, however they figured it out, they're very much in the know. They believe that there's technology out there that's already at a high enough technology readiness level to move directly into phase 2 and won't require a phase 1 contract. So those components who have those topics are DLA, OSD, and US SOCOM. You'll see those topics in that module I just showed you, that topics CITES list, and you'll also see these topics in the BAA itself. So you can navigate to the direct to phase 2 section and you'll see which ones are there. There's usually very few. But if you feel like your technology isn't qualified for a phase 1, meaning that it's probably at a mid-grade TRL level, like a 3 or 4, maybe 5 even, that might be somewhere where you want to be. Like if you don't need to do any sort of feasibility or concept analysis or some sort of testing to see if the idea even has legs, you already know that. You've already self-funded essentially a phase 1. A direct to phase 2 might be a really good place for you to be. To be eligible for that direct to phase 2, you do have to provide documentation to essentially say that you already did the phase 1. If you were to look at what the scope of work for phase 1 would be, you already did it. It can't be from a prior SBIR or an ongoing SBIR. So this phase 1 work has to be either self-funded or funded by another customer that's not SBIR. So it can be funded by another federal customer potentially, but it has to be non-SBIR program. Typically, these direct to phase 2s, when people are proving that they've done a phase one already. When I say that, proving they've done a phase one, meaning that they've done equivalent work of a phase one, those are usually self-funded. That's typically how it was. It has to have been substantially performed by the small business and or the proposed principal investigator. And there's some IP situations. So they want to ensure that if you're relying on intellectual property that you have, if it's not wholly owned, you don't have full right, title, and license to it, that you have the ability to, you have already obtained the full right, the license that you need in order to do the work if you don't actually own it. So there's a couple of things that might trip up some smaller, tiny beginning startups. But if you're a little bit more mature, or if you've done a lot of self-funded work in a commercial space, this might be something for you. Okay, so the process that we go through first is obviously identifying the topic that fits you. That, again, like I said, in the beginning, it can be challenging because you might already have sort of a business plan and an idea for where you want to take some stuff, and you're not seeing anything on the topic list that's an exact fit. That may or may not be okay. This is a business decision for you. And we'll kind of talk about that. You have to register. There's going to be some Q&A opportunities. There's a Q&A opportunity right now. Obviously, you're going to build a proposal, and then you're going to submit it. The DoD also, because of the 2022 extension authorization for this program, has a new requirement that they have an open topic. And these open topics are supposed to increase the commercialization, expand the industrial base to like kind of reach into those companies that didn't really want to touch the DoD before. You know, they also want to have more options, I think, is my interpretation. So unless, like they call the topic list, the typical traditional topic list, the conventional topics. And so they all have now this opportunity to have an open topic that's just kind of like what we call blue sky. Just give us an idea, sort of like what NSF does in their SBIR program. So you're able to propose more than one proposal. Like you might, as a company, decide you're going to do 5 different topics. That's okay. But you can only do one proposal for an open topic. You can't do more than one. So that take a look in the BAA and read the solicitation. And there might be maybe if you're not seeing the perfect fit topic, then maybe the open topic is with you. With the like, you can talk to the authors of these topics, which is great. Take that opportunity if you can. You have until May 17th. So you have an opportunity to contact them. You can call them, you can email them. They only want to know technical questions. You know, don't ask them how many pages does this section need to be, or, you know, can I send you a video? Don't ask those questions. Ask very technical questions. You just want to use the opportunity to better understand what they're asking for, what their needs are, what their interests are. Don't ask them, you know, what the solution approach should actually be. Don't say, hey, if I proposed that I used AI to do X, would you like that? Don't ask them that. They're not going to say anything. So take this opportunity, look at the topics, see if there's a fit. If you have questions, you can call and email them up until May 17th. Registration bits. So there's a lot of registrations that need to occur before you can submit a proposal. And the first one that you need to do, if you haven't done already, is SAM.gov. SAM.gov will give you your UEI, which is your unique identifier, entity identifier. That is important for you to obtain and link, so all of these systems know who your company is. So do that first. And then a lot of the agencies are moving to login.gov. as their two-factor authentication to further protect the data that's inside of these submission sites and other sites. So if you don't have a login.gov already, go ahead and get one. You'll need to register in SBIR.gov as well. If you are already registered in SBIR.gov, that's great. You would have already received an SBC control ID number. That will be required. You'll have to record that and pull that out and put it into the proposal. But more importantly, you have to complete the company commercialization report within SBIR.gov and then pull it out of there. So you kind of download it out of there, and then you're going to re-upload it for the DoD. Why they give you this extra step, and I mean, all these other systems talk to each other, so I don't necessarily know why you have to do this step. They should be smart enough to talk, but they don't. So that's why it's important to do SBIR.gov, because that CCR report needs to come out of there. Then finally, we get to the submission site, which is the DSIP site that I showed you. So that site has the solicitation and the topics, the Q&A section if you want to do online Q&A through CITIS. That's all in there. And it's also the site that you're going to actually be submitting under. There are some help videos that I think are pretty important if you've never been in that system before. In the training materials, you're going to need your company UEI, so that's why we did SAM.gov first, and the firm PIN in order to link your login.gov account to your DSIP account. So they make you do the linking. Definitely walk through these tutorials and videos. We were just doing another webinar this morning for a local accelerator that Jamie is leading with the Boulder SBDC. And I told a story this morning, so you may, if you were on that this morning, you may hear it again. But the registrations are so important, not only to do early, but to keep updated. I had a client last night, really late, it was like 10 o'clock at night, who emailed me, called me too, because they got the phone call that everybody wishes that they could get. It was a phone call from SpaceWorks, which is under AFWorks, who has that CSO proposal. And the government customer said, please submit a direct to phase 2. We want you, we want to give you money. Can you please do it? And they said, no. Initially they said no, because it was due today at 10 o'clock Mountain Time. It just felt impossible. And they said, no, you should do it. We'll help you facilitate some things that need to be done. And they said, okay, we'll go for it. We'll pull an all-nighter. Well, they had not been keeping the DSIP site or SAM, or I don't think they had SAM updated recently either, but needless to say, DSIP wasn't updated with the correct, most recent POC as the administrator. So the administrator was a former employee. The two-factor authentication, even though they had his email, the two-factor authentication was going to his phone. He was sitting in the movies. Nobody could get into DSIP. It was becoming a whole thing. And I think it delayed quite a few other things. And ultimately, they missed the submission this morning by 15 seconds. And they lost out on $1.25 million. So 15 seconds will cost you that. It takes you maybe a minute to update people. So make sure you have the right admins in there, make sure everything is working correctly, go in and periodically check in if you don't do DoD all the time. If you've never done DoD or any of these federal things before, but you want to go after this opportunity, start now, because SAM.gov can be sometimes tricky. It talks to the IRS, and you don't want to get stuck in a SAM.gov loop and not be able to complete the rest of the registrations. That has to be done first. So make sure you're on top of things, because it can turn out no fun. As I mentioned, the topic Q&A, you have the opportunity until May 17th to talk to the program managers, or what we call the TPOCs, technical points of contact, until May 17th. So May 17th is actually the first day that you can submit a proposal to the DoD. So if you are just a go-getter and you have it done and you're ready, you can submit anytime after May 17th up until June 14th. After May 17th, you can't have that direct contact with the TPOCs anymore. You can't email or call them anymore. It's the dark period. But you can submit the written questions to the CITIS, the topic Q&A that I showed you in the beginning. That's already open. If you go in there today, you will see people have already asked questions. That's open until May 31st at noon Eastern. So, if you missed the opportunity to talk to people before May 17th, go ahead and submit the questions through there. But always monitor the DSIP site. Monitor the topic Q&A. Somebody might ask a question you haven't thought of, but it also gives you an idea of who your competition is. People are sometimes not very good at kind of veiling or posing their questions well. And so be careful if you're posting a question, everybody's going to see it. So, make sure you're not giving away any secret sauce. And monitor it too, because there's amendments that come out to the solicitation, and those amendments typically impact the topics. So they might delete a topic, they might add a topic, or they might edit something about the topic. So constantly monitor it, and specifically before you say, yeah, the proposal's final, go back in, take a look at it before you go. Okay, so the content of this thing has not changed in a number of years. So it's been 6 volumes for a long time. There's a proposal cover sheet, and that's done all online. The technical volume is like a Word document that you build. I'll show you some information about that in a second. The cost volume is also done online. You fill in the blanks. There's fields in there. So typically people will build an Excel file, figure out their pricing, and then hard code those numbers back into DSIP. We already talked about volume 4, which is the CCR out of SBIR.gov. And then we have volume 5, which is supporting documents. Some components you might have hardly anything in this volume, and some components you might have a ton of stuff. So it just depends on the component specific supplemental BAA that you're going after. The two things that you for sure will end up having to do regardless of the component is the telecom certification. That essentially says that you're not using or purchasing or procuring any products that are particular Chinese-owned companies' products. And then there's a foreign ownership or controlled disclosure. This is now required, and it's kind of part of that FY22 extension authorization. And then there's going to be other supporting documents depending on the component. And then finally, there's a fraud, waste, and abuse training. I believe you only have to do it one time a year. You click a button in DSIP, it goes through the whole thing. It logs you in as watching it, and you're done. So there's not much to do there, thank goodness. The format for the proposal is in section 5.3 of the overall DoD BAA, but make sure you read the components supplemental BAA as well. They do have proposal templates at the DSIP site. You have to log in using your login.gov to get to those. So if you don't have a DSIP registration in login.gov, you won't be able to touch those. So you won't be able to see what you're supposed to do. So make sure you log in. And then more information, this link again about using the DSIP portal, I've provided here too. A lot of people get worried about seeing kind of all those volumes and all of the supplemental documentation, but everything's pretty much just scored off of the technical volume. And so the technical volume is obviously very important. These are all the sections that you're supposed to have. And so follow the template, follow the BAA, don't change the titles. I've highlighted in yellow the 3 that I think you need to spend the most time on and pay closest attention to, because typically these are the things that get evaluated the closest, and we'll talk about evaluation factors later. But as you can see, you are proposing your own statement of work. So you're telling them, hey, I saw your topic. I see what your objectives were in that topic, and I am going to tell you, I'm going to meet those objectives, and here's all of the tasks I'm giving myself to meet those objectives. So this is your opportunity to show what you're going to do. In phase 1, I typically don't see the use of subcontractors or consultants. It's a low dollar value situation. By the way, every component has a different dollar value. Some use a base and an option period, so they all have different periods of performance as well. So you'll just have to look at the particular components BAA to identify that, but they're pretty low. They're under $200,000. So, and generally about 6 months long. That's not you typically don't need a subcontractor. You might need like an individual subject matter expert 1099. But if you do need them, it's okay. That's, it's great. There are limits. You have to identify who they are. You have to get good pricing detail from them. You still have to perform at least 2/3 of the work, which is essentially 2/3 of the total total cost of the contract. So say you're going to propose $150,000, 7% of that 150 is profit. What's left over is what they calculate that 2/3 off of. So the actual cost. So you do have to self-perform. This can be a challenge for tiny, tiny businesses or one-person businesses. So that's why subcontracting doesn't happen a lot under phase one, because it's really sometimes difficult. If you're planning on using 1099s for the majority of the work, that won't fly. You're going to have W-2s. So there's some strategy involved with that. You could use FFRDCs. There used to be some sort of like approval and a waiver. You don't have to do that anymore. With relation to the budget, as I mentioned, everything's done online. You will have to be prepared to submit further documentation. You'll see when you get into the budget module of DSIP that it's going to ask for explanations of cost estimates. So you can't just guess on things. You can't just make up numbers. You have to have some hard numbers. You have to have pay rates, indirect rates, material costs with quote backups, letters of commitment from consultants that show their hourly rate and total price, stuff like that. So there's more information at the DCAA website if you want some more information about the audit process and information. For phase ones, they're not super critical. It's just kind of getting the system to accept what you have. The contracting officers, when they select you, will ask for more information just to justify the price. Phase two, however, will be a lot more interesting. And then if you ever get into a situation where you're at high dollars into the millions, then you get to deal with audits. The evaluation criteria is based upon these 3 items, ABC, listed in order of importance. So they're really looking at the technical merit of your proposed innovation. Is it really a solution to the topic or subtopic? And is it innovative? Like that's the biggest piece of this whole thing, the word innovative. Is it truly innovative? They do want to see the qualifications of the key personnel. So specifically the principal investigator should be a subject matter expert in the field. They do like to see publications. They do like to see, just somebody who's just knows what they're doing and who can manage the project, but not necessarily like from a program management perspective, but the principal investigator is leading the research. So that's the person that you need to be there. They also need to be able to have the qualifications to commercialize. So this is a unique person. Hopefully you have someone on your team who that can be. And if you don't, a lot of people will use kind of contingency letters or something to that effect if they find somebody good out there on the street. They also are going to look at the commercialization potential. And so that is going to be a big part of where you're going to strategize in terms of I'm meeting DoD needs, but I also am going to get this into the market, whatever that market might look like. So you need to be very careful that you have a good understanding of what the market is, even if the market is just the government. Understand who is willing to buy, how much do you want to sell whatever you're doing for, how big is that market, who are your competitors, all that kind of stuff. So that's super important with the DoD, but they're really looking at the technical innovation as it relates to their needs. And are you meeting their needs? And so that goes back to talking to these TPOCs now before you It closes on May 17th to really get a good feel for what they're really into, what they're currently doing, and getting some more detail on any questions that you have in the topic that they wrote. So the more that you know about that, the more you can do some creative writing in order to convince them what you have is going to meet those needs. So there are some component dependent strategies. Unfortunately, DoD is not all the same. So when you read the individual BAAs, the supplemental BAAs, you'll see some bits of information in there that can help guide and what we call white glove your proposal. So it's kind of like spiffing up, like, the guy with the white gloves on the Stanley Cup, like you're kind of polishing it. So once you get it all done and it's great and you feel like you've got a really good pitch, going back and finding tidbits like this in the Army's BAA is that polishing, is that have you describe like a vision or end state of the research and like that has a most likely path to transition. Have you really thought about specific Army operational requirements? What programs are they using? Is it going to be a standalone product or service specifically to the Army? What is the end game for the Army and how does it fit into their larger role? So you can follow the DoD BAA, write all this stuff up in your tech volume, but then take some time, give yourself some time to really do some good spiffing up to convince the Army, in this case, that, you have a good vision and state for them specifically. Okay, with TABA. If you haven't heard of TABA before, it stands for Technical and Business Assistance. This used to be called Discretionary Technical Assistance a long time ago, if you've been in the program in the past. So the government identified a number of years ago that, it's getting to be a number now, that they're asking small businesses to commercialize. And you're getting graded on it. There's performance benchmarks you're supposed to be doing. But these small businesses don't necessarily have all of the resources in-house, money or people, to do that. And it just kind of sets them up for failure if you're evaluating and pushing them to commercialize and they just don't have the resources to do it. So, which is awesome. They thought about this. They give money to the awardees to further commercialize, to do this commercialization. So what does that mean? That means better technical decisions. So if you need to hire some specific sort of subject matter expert on the technology to give you ideas on how to commercialize, like maybe you have a manufacturing partner or something like that, or any problems that you can't solve in your own, anything that can minimize any technical risk, anything to do with commercializing the product or process. So this can be things like marketing and other BD sort of things. You can use it for also regulatory compliance. So obviously with DoD, you're going to have, especially as you move into phase 2 and phase 3, more requirements, more compliance issues to deal with. And so you can use the money to do compliance. And then finally, there's intellectual property protection that they can use. So paying for patent work, like prior art searches and filing of patents, you can use the TABA money for that. The TABA requirements are all dependent on the component, if they offer it or if they don't offer it, and the dollar value that they give you. So for example, the Army is $5,000, and that amount is in addition to the money you're asking for to do the technical work. So this is awesome. They're just giving you an extra $5,000. And you have to identify what you're going to do, who you're using in the proposal for TABA. So some of the components, such as the Army, have their own technical assistance sort of office and people. If you elect to use them, then that's awesome. And the whole BA talks about what they can do and all that. But you can also find somebody outside. So maybe you have IP counsel and you want to give them the entire $5,000, or you have an accounting firm, or you have a commercialization expert. You can give that to them. The BAAs will tell you exactly what information you need from that third-party source. It's usually a letter that talks about their qualifications and how much they're going to charge and what they're going to do. And that needs to go into your cost volume if you're going to ask for this money. And there's one minor rule is that you can't give the money to yourself, but you can't give it to an affiliate or an investor or a subcontractor or a consultant. So it definitely has to be a totally autonomous third party that's helping you out. The SBIR program as a whole offers this. You get more money in phase 2. So for example, DOE gives you $50,000 in phase 2 for commercialization. So that's just a huge amount of money to let you do a lot of really, really cool stuff. DOD, again, is component specific. You might get $10,000 in phase 2, but still, hey, $10,000 to do things, it's like free money. So definitely take advantage of all of this, because the most important part for phase 1 about having TABA, so whether you use the components technical person, you go have an outside person, it's highly advisable, from my opinion, to use it in a more commercialization, BD, technical versus accounting or lawyers or IP stuff in phase 1, because in phase 2, you have to write, a really solid commercialization approach. It needs to be very convincing at that point. And all of those people can help you build that and do that. And then in phase 2, because of the compliance and regulatory issues that come up, a lot of people end up using their phase 2 TABA to do the compliance and accountants and IP attorneys and stuff like that. I mean, it's completely a business decision, but that's just generally what I see happen. So that is TABA, and that is the end of my presentation. So we can start talking questions.
Awesome. Thank you, Stephanie.
Yeah.
A lot of good information, especially for this one. So we have a few questions that have come in. So this is an interesting one about the reviewers. So do the reviewers come from the DoD, or are they outside of it?
They come from the DoD. So you will have people who are very knowledgeable in these areas of topics that you have you've submitted to. So people have asked me, like, who's my audience? How technical should I be? How technical is it layman's terms? You should be very technical. You pretend you're proposing to a colleague.
Great, that's really helpful. You just started talking about some of the compliance stuff. So for phase 1, do you have to have a DCAA compliant budgeting software?
That's a great question. No, you do not. And often for phase 2, you do not either nowadays. And GovRIG does compliant stuff. So I'm not trying to, I could be selling to you, but I'm not. Okay? So you don't necessarily need it for a lot of that. A lot of the DoD components have moved to firm fixed price. All phase 1s are firm fixed price, meaning you do not need a compliant accounting system. You don't need approved indirect rates, none of that kind of stuff. The BAA, I believe, for each component calls out to you whether or not in phase 2 you will need one. I think Navy is what's coming to mind. I believe Navy's BAA specifically says, be prepared. If you're going to go after a phase 2, you need to have a compliant accounting system. So that's something to prepare for. And then they typically will not award to you until that accounting system's been approved. And then you get to go through the indirect rate. And the other piece of advice is in phase 2, typically you'll start talking to DCMA, who manages the property management system. So if you have a cost type contract, you should have a compliant property management system as well as a compliant procurement system. We did a little blurb on intellectual property this morning, and we've done it before, but there's a lot more. There's a lot of intellectual property management. That's not a system that's audited. but that's also a system that needs to be in place. And the one thing you will need for phase one is for all DoD is you will need an IT system that is NIST compliant. CMMC is the tagline that we keep talking about, but there's all defense contractors, regardless of size, regardless of dollar value or contract type, have to be compliant with the cybersecurity safeguarding clause. This will require you, before you get a contract, you have to go through like a basic assessment of your IT system. This is sort of a self-assessment that you do and upload it online. The contracting officer will make you do it before award. And if your score is too low, they will not award to you. So as you'll see in some of the DoD stuff, there's some security questionnaires potentially. And so I think the thing to be most focused on for phase one is not accounting, but it's IT.
Awesome. That's really good advice and good information to know as we move forward. Cool. So let's see here. Is there a NIST compliant checklist to check you are good?
There actually is. It's very difficult to tell you where it is though. So Jamie, can I send it to you and you can have it? They don't make it easy. There's like a cross link in the DFARS clause that shows up in your contract, but there's essentially kind of like a table that you can kind of check yourself against. The things that are on it though are, that you make sure you have two-factor authentication and, you have a lot of protections. It's really about information residing in and through your email, your server, and making sure it's protected. The government has kind of put a broad label on all DoD SBIR stuff as being controlled unclassified information. So they put a ton of security protocol, and it is a financial burden on small businesses. And so it's funny that they want to expand their industrial base and like get commercial companies, but then they want you to spend money on IT. But I get it. There's been intrusions, there's been stealing by China, there's all of these things that happen. And so this is just to protect the data that we have, and that's valuable. But.
Great, thank you. So I usually try to stay away from questions that are about specific technologies, but maybe you can touch on this one just in case you've seen it in the current solicitation. So it's about 3D printing. And if you've seen anything around 3D printing, this one's particularly 3D printing concrete. But I guess maybe just overall in the solicitation, if that's a topic that you have seen.
I have not looked at all the topics in general yet, but do you mind, can I share my screen quickly and I can show you where that might be so everybody can get the benefit of that? Okay. So where I just was here at the main page. And when you click on topics and topic Q&A, it takes you to the whole list. And so you can search by, keyword, and I don't know, let's just do 3D and we'll see what comes up. There's no topics for 3D. So might need to do some other keywords, but they're all listed. The ones that start with A are Army. Let me list down here. So you can just go all the way down. So this one already has 10 questions, which is interesting. So this must be a popular one. But once you expand upon it, it tells you who your POC is and you can contact them that way, has the objective, the description. It talks about exactly what they expect you to do in phase 1 and 2, and then some of their ideas for dual use applications in phase 3. And then here's all the questions that somebody went in so you can kind of take a look. So if you're not sure, just kind of scroll through these, use the search function. You can see Army has a ton. DLA and DHA and DTRA are there. And then, MDA is in here too. I didn't realize that. Anyway, Missile Defense Agency, and then Navy. So this is where you need to start, is to look at all of these topics, see if you find a fit, then just based upon the title, and then expand it, really take a look at their objectives and the description. So you can see the specificity here. What is this one? This is the deployable assault cap crossing system. This is all the things that thing has to do. So that's how specific the OD is. And it can be a challenge sometimes to fit yourself in there, but hopefully that helps.
Yeah, that's super helpful. Thank you. That helps people know how to filter through the topics, because I know that can be a little overwhelming for people to figure out where they need to go. So that's great.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's a good reminder for me, because I've just been doing it so long that I just know exactly where to go. So that was a great question. So thank you to the asker, and thank you, Jamie, for selecting it.
Yeah, definitely. So that seems like what we have for submitted questions. But I guess one that I thought we could maybe touch on would be best practices for reaching out to the topic authors, since this is kind of your window to do it right now. If there's anything you would suggest that they say to them, or how to broach the topic. I know it's don't ask obvious questions, but beyond that.
Yeah, for sure. So the challenge here with this one is that there's a fine line between being chit-chatty and learning more about what they want and asking particular questions about the topic. So some of them, it's just going to, each individual human is different. And so some of them might be more inclined to answer questions regarding just kind of about Army needs and, interests and what they're doing now. And some of them might say, no, I can only answer questions about the topic. Typically, I think that the best course of action is typically to email them and provide some like a very high level, few sentences about your company, and then some specific questions about the topic right now. Just clarifications that need to have, so you can see in what I just showed you, like there's very specific technical questions. That's because the solicitation's open. So there's and then obviously there's the blackout period, May 17th. Now, after June 14th, when these go in, on June 15th, you can keep these people's contact information and contact them later now that the solicitation's done and proposals are in. And then you can have those more chit-chatty conversations of, hey, what are you guys doing? This is what we do, and kind of have more of that BD sort of schmoozy vibe. Again, some might be more inclined than others, but typically email is the best way to do it. Or, if you don't hear back, you can always give them a phone call. As we talked about this morning, running into them at conferences or events or anything like that, it's a great place to be. They do go to those things, and, they're interested in learning about new technologies. So, I think right now you just have to be very, very specific, and having it in your questions in writing. They give you your phone call and you can call them, but it's good to have your question in writing, I think. And that's why emailing them with your questions is the way to go right now. But keep their contact information, because it's really challenging with this website to go back and find them once the proposals are due and done and it's been archived.
Great, that's really helpful. So now we have just a couple minutes left. So I just want to say this is part of our Red Team Review program. So Stephanie, do you want to talk a little bit about what a Red Team Review entails? So that people
Totally. We stole the term from large businesses because that's what they do in their big, huge proposal workshop warehouses that they have. So what it entails is essentially I provide you kickoff guidance in terms of what do you want to do? Does it fit SBIR? How do we strategize about it a little bit? Instructions. So, here's where you're going to find everything. These are the bits and pieces. Some elements of, like an Excel file that has a proposal template or, for you to put into the system. So just to kind of get you started. So essentially getting you on the right path, giving you homework, and getting you started to write. And then the real like red team part of it, red team means essentially marking up your document with a red pen. So you're sending me typically your budget, maybe some forms if you have questions, but mostly the technical volume for me to read, work through, give you advice, edit, comment, and really kind of make it the best that it can be. I sit in for a reviewer standpoint and take a look and make sure that it's all good, and then give you advice on how to submit if you have questions or you run into anything. So, that's why we do this so far in advance, so that this gives you time to build everything. It gives us time to iterate, and then it gives you time to submit and hopefully avoid any technical issues on the DSIP side. So that's it's what a lot of our clients pay us to do. So it's an awesome opportunity to have the program and have that sort of availability under the SBDC.
Awesome. Thank you, Stephanie.
Mm-hmm.
So just a reminder that deadline is at midnight tonight if you do want to apply for this round of Red Team Review. It does focus on DoD, and you do need to say what topic you are planning to apply for. So I always like to make sure that you have looked at, the website that Stephanie just walked us through. So be sure you do that. You do also have to be headquartered in Colorado. So I do know we have some people here joining us from out of state. Unfortunately, you don't qualify for this, but if you are in Colorado, please do consider applying for it. Anything you want to leave us with, Stephanie?
I don't think so, other than just pay attention and read the BAA, read the supplemental BAA, and don't kid yourself on trying to fit a square peg into a round hole, or whatever that saying is. You really have to have a solid fit. There's too much competition in this space for you to waste your time on hoping that they'll like you. So really make sure it's good. But otherwise, thanks everybody for your time. And thanks again, Jamie. And I'm excited for the Red Team Review.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Take care, everyone.